06:07 local time, open ocean. The surface looks calm in that early hour way that feels almost staged. The sky is pale, the sea is glassy with only a faint wind line cutting across the water, and the horizon seems too clean, too empty, for anything serious to be happening. From a distance, the U.S. aircraft carrier looks like what it always is, a moving city of steel, steady and indifferent, advancing as if the ocean belongs to no one. But the ocean doesn't need to look dangerous to be dangerous. Inside the carrier's Combat Information Center, the lighting is low and controlled, dim enough to protect night vision, bright enough for screens to stay readable. Consoles glow in disciplined blues and greens. Watchstanders sit in silence broken only by short technical phrases: range, bearing, track quality, contact classification. Routine traffic populates the surface picture: distant merchant ships, predictable lanes, slow movers, everything normal. Then the normal ends. At 06:10, the surface search radar paints a new cluster far out on the edge of reliable track quality. Not one contact, not two, 6. They appear close enough in time to feel coordinated, but spaced far enough apart to suggest a formation designed for flexibility rather than tight escort. The radar operator zooms, the returns sharpen, their speed is higher than commercial traffic. Their spacing is too deliberate for random drift, and there is something else: no ice, no civilian transponder signals, no commercial identification. 6 surface contacts, silent. The watch officer doesn't react with surprise. He reacts with procedure, a slight forward lean, a hand raised in a small signal to begin correlation. Tracks are assigned. Plot history begins. The system starts drawing the story in math. At 06:12, the initial classification comes in carefully, likely naval hulls based on speed profile and radar return. Not massive vessels, not an aircraft carrier's equal, but not fishing boats, not Coast Guard cutters, not anything that would be accidental. The carrier continues its steady course. Speed holds constant. Nothing changes on the surface that an outsider would notice. Inside SIC, everything changes. At 06:14, long-range optics come online. The camera feed stabilizes on the horizon. Heat shimmer rises in delicate distortions above the water, but the shapes are there: gray hulls, angular superstructures, a posture that doesn't belong to civilian traffic. Russian warships, 6 of them. They are not scattered, they are not wandering, they are moving with intent, closing from multiple bearings like a set of doors slowly swinging inward. No radio calls, no warnings, no acknowledgement, just movement. At sea, movement is language. Silence is punctuation. And the sentence being written is not friendly. At 06:16, the first hail is transmitted on open maritime channels. Calm voice, standard phrasing, identification, position, intent, lawful transit in international waters, a routine attempt to establish communication, no response. At 06:17, the hail is repeated, now in a second language as a courtesy, still professional, still neutral, still non-escalatory, nothing. The Russian formation maintains speed, moderate but purposeful. They are not charging, they are not drifting. They are doing something more controlled, compressing space without appearing overtly hostile. This is gray zone pressure, designed to force the other side to react first. At 06:19, one of the contacts alters course by a few degrees, barely visible to the eye, unmistakable on radar. It is the first move that stops being transit and becomes intercept geometry, not collision course, not an act of war, but a line that places the Russian ship closer to the carrier's projected path than normal seamanship would require. Inside SIC, closest point of approach is calculated. Then, recalculated. The number tightens. No one says the word threat. They do not need to. In modern naval operations, intent is inferred from behavior, not announced. At 0621, the carrier's escorts adjust in response, not dramatically, not in a way that could be framed as provocation. A destroyer on the outer screen widens spacing by a fraction, a curtain being drawn. A cruiser shifts slightly to refine coverage angles. These are small moves measured in tenths of miles, but they matter because they reshape the geometry without conceding the carrier's path. The carrier itself does not turn, it does not speed up, it does not slow down. The carrier holds. That steadiness is not passive. It is the most aggressive form of restraint, refusing to be shaped. At 0624, the optics feed sharpens further. Hull numbers begin to resolve. Flags become visible. There is no confusion about identity. Both sides know exactly who they are looking at. At 0626, the Russian ships tighten again, not by closing in a straight line, but by repositioning into rolls. Two ships slide toward the carrier's starboard sector. One holds port quarter, matching speed. Another stays forward at offset angle, close enough to crowd the carrier's forward space without crossing directly ahead. The remaining two keep depth behind, ready to reinforce, ready to rotate, ready to maintain pressure. It is not a full encirclement, it is a constraint posture. At 0628, a second Russian ship emits low-power surface search radar, not a fire control lock, not a targeting illumination, but not passive anymore. An electronic tap on the glass, a way of saying, you are being painted, you are being measured. The carrier's electronic warfare team logs it immediately. Frequency, power level, duration. The data becomes a record. The record becomes leverage. In modern confrontations, evidence matters because outcomes are judged later, far from the water, in rooms where the only weapon is proof. At 0631, the next Russian move is subtle and carefully chosen. A brief speed increase from the forward vessel. 2 knots, enough to tighten CPA further, not enough to look like a charge. On deck, the sea remains calm. Sailors still see blue water and open sky. The carrier's flight operations are not stopped. They are paused, not cancelled, paused. A distinction that carries weight. The ship is not frightened, it is focused. Inside SIC, the watch team continues speaking in numbers. At 0634, the carrier transmits another hail, firmer now but still professional. A reminder about safe separation, a request for intentions, a warning that close approach will be documented. No response. The silence is now intentional, a tactic designed to remove clarity and force the carrier to interpret. And interpretation is where mistakes begin. At 0637, one Russian ship makes its boldest move yet, a gradual alteration to cross inside a tighter safety band, not across the bow, not a cut-off, but close enough that the carrier's bridge team cannot ignore it without acknowledging the pressure. CPA drops below a key margin. The carrier still does not turn. On the bridge, the captain watches repeater displays rather than the horizon. He does not need binoculars to understand what is happening. The geometry is already telling the story. His voice is calm when it comes. Maintain course. Maintain speed. Log everything. That order is not dramatic. It is decisive. At 0640, another low-power emission is detected. A second Russian vessel briefly sweeps. Again, not fire control, but the pattern is building, painting without locking, signaling without shooting. It is controlled friction. At 0642, the escorts subtly tighten their arcs, not aggressive, not threatening, but no longer theoretical. The protective geometry around the carrier is being refined into something the Russian ships will feel, even if they don't admit it. And still, the carrier holds. At 06:45, the Russian formation compresses further. Now the carrier sits at the center of a tightening shape, not surrounded completely, but pressured from multiple bearings. It is a posture designed to constrain movement options without crossing the line into overt hostility. No weapons are manned, no gun mounts swing dramatically, no alarms sound. But the calm of routine transit is gone. At 06:47, the carrier's SIC runs a silent simulation. If the Russian ships continue tightening at this rate, two will pass inside a range that signals coercion. Still legal, still deniable, but unmistakable. And that is the purpose, to test the carrier's discipline. At 06:49, the captain authorizes a quiet readiness shift. Not general quarters. Not battle stations. A calibrated posture change, key watch teams reinforced, aviation option prepared, documentation systems prioritized, cameras already rolling, logs already building, evidence already forming. At 06:52, the flight deck receives the order that changes the encounter without firing a shot. Prepare to launch. Not a scramble, a signal. The difference matters. At 06:54, rotor blades begin to spin. A helicopter on the carrier's deck comes alive. The sound travels across the water, carrying farther than any radio hail. It cuts through the silence like a statement that cannot be ignored. The Russian ships hear it. They might not respond on radio, but they will respond to presence. At 06:56, the helicopter lifts off. It climbs to a low operational altitude and moves forward, not directly overhead, not aggressively, but close enough to command attention. Its sensors are already active. Electro-optical systems stabilize on hull numbers, deck crews, bridge windows, everything recorded. Everything time-stamped, everything geo-referenced. This is not intimidation. This is documentation in the sky. Ships can play geometry games. Aircraft remove denial. At 06:58, the helicopter establishes an orbit near the most forward Russian vessel, the one tightening CPA, the one testing margins. From the air, the choreography becomes obvious. What can be argued on the surface becomes clear when seen from above. Coordinated movement, systematic pressure, deliberate intercept lines. The helicopter's crew broadcasts a calm warning on open channels. Professional, neutral, unemotional. This is a U.S. Navy aircraft. You are operating in an unsafe manner in international waters. Maintain safe separation and alter course. Then it repeats clearly in Russian-accented English phrasing and standard maritime language, enough to be understood, enough to be recorded. For the first time, the Russian ships show visible hesitation, not a retreat. A recalculation. At 07:01, the most forward vessel reduces speed slightly. The wake shortens, CPA widens by a fraction. Another ship drifts outward, increasing lateral distance. Small moves, but real ones. The helicopter holds orbit. It does not chase. It does not hover directly above. Pressure is applied through presence, not pursuit. At 07:03, electronic emissions drop. The low-power sweeps stop.
The Russian ships return to passive posture. The carrier's SIC updates the captain. The tightening geometry is loosening. But the encounter is not over yet. Gray zone actors rarely stop after one test. They probe again, looking for weakness, looking for hesitation. At 07:06, the Russian ships make a coordinated adjustment, subtle, synchronized, attempting to reform pressure while keeping distance just wide enough to deny the accusation of unsafe conduct.
It is a careful move. professional. Calculated. The carrier does not react with a turn. It reacts with steadiness. The helicopter remains overhead as a witness. At 0708, a brief burst of radio chatter is detected, not directed at the carrier, but internal coordination among the Russian ships. They are repositioning. They are recalculating the posture under observation. The presence of the helicopter changes the cost of every move. Any unsafe pass now becomes a recorded fact, not a deniable interpretation. At 0710, the most forward Russian vessel alters course by a few degrees, enough to break the intercept line. Others follow. The semicircle stretches, the arc opens. It is not announced as a withdrawal. No apology is offered, none is needed. At sea, movement is communication. At 0712, the helicopter widens its orbit, ensuring the entire formation sees it clearly. A silhouette against brightening sky, unarmed, but dominant, because it represents layered capability behind it, escorts, sensors, aircraft, and doctrine. The message is not "we will shoot." The message is, "you cannot force us to move." At 0714, the helicopter turns back toward the carrier. The signal has been delivered and received. On the bridge, the captain nods once, no words, no drama. At 0716, the aircraft lands smoothly on deck. Rotors slow. Deck crew secures it with practiced precision. From the outside, it looks routine, just another launch and recovery at sea. But everyone aboard understands what just happened. The pressure was reversed. At 0718, the Russian ships remain visible on the horizon, but their behavior has shifted from constraining to observing. No coordinated tightening, no active emissions, no intercept lines. Their wakes angle away instead of inward. At 0721, one ship breaks farther off to the north, another drifts west. The rest trail behind at increasing range, maintaining visibility without proximity. The formation is no longer unified pressure. It is individual ships making individual decisions. Inside SIC, analysts lock timelines, radar tracks are saved, EO video is archived, emission logs stored, every maneuver preserved with timestamps and coordinates. This is not just a report, it is a record. Encounters like this rarely end with explosions, they end with documentation. At 0725, the captain orders normal operations to continue. No victory announcement, no celebration. The carrier continues exactly as before. Steady speed, steady heading, disciplined posture. Because changing now would imply the pressure mattered. It didn't. The lesson is older than modern sensors, but sharper in modern competition. Control doesn't belong to the loudest radio call or the closest hull. It belongs to the side that understands when to hold steady and when to make the other side blink without ever pulling the trigger. The sea returns to calm. The horizon widens again. The Russian ships fade into distance, reduced to shrinking radar returns and thin wakes dissolving into open water. But the implications remain. 6 warships attempted to apply pressure without firing a shot. They used silence and geometry to test discipline. They pushed until the boundary became visible and stopped when the response made escalation too costly. That is how modern confrontations unfold, not with explosions, with calculation, not with headlines, with restraint. And out here, on open water, restraint isn't weakness, it is dominance, expressed quietly.